Hello, you're watching a new episode of Give the People What They Want. I'm Prasanth, I'm a journalist from India, and with me is Roger McKenzie, the international editor of Morning Star. And we have quite the episode, a lot of developments over the past week. The BRICS summit, of course, is something everyone has been talking about. We'll have updates from Palestine, also one of the biggest strikes across the world ever. So there's a lot that has happened, and we'll be talking about all of that in this episode. So keep watching. Give the people what they want.
Give the people what they want.
Give the people what they want. Your weekly movement news roundup.
Welcome to the episode once again. And, we'll start, of course, with the BRICS summit. The summits everyone is actually really looking forward to. The 17th summit of the BRICS bloc. The BRICS plus 20 countries are now involved in various capacities. And, it's a very important time for the BRICS countries to be meeting. We all know how the world around us is currently structured, what has been happening in West Asia, in the Asia Pacific region, in Latin America, in Africa, all these regions. And many people have looked to BRICS as an entity, a bloc which can provide some kind of a different way of doing things, an alternative, so to speak. And especially considering how some of the other institutions have been performing or failing to perform in that role. So Roger, take us through what were some of the key outcomes of this BRICS summit that took place in Brazil and just concluded a few days ago.
I think many people were kind of worried that coming so soon after the last BRICS summit that this might be a bit of a damn squib, but I don't think that's true. I think it's been an important summit, and I think the some of the things that were talked about and the final communique from the summit really emphasised, I think, the continuing importance of BRICS. And I think for me, one of the important kind of milestones was the way that BRICS really made sure that there was a clear understanding that the people of the global majority were firmly opposed to the attacks that were made on Iran, obviously a BRICS member. But they were clearly opposed to that attack by Iran, by the United States, by Israel, by the United States on Iran, and the way that this is completely outside of international law. And I think the fact that we're talking about around about half the population of the planet, and certainly half the economic activity of the planet, more than half of the economic activity of the planet. This is quite significant. I mean, I think it's a real message to the United States and Israel that we're not prepared from the global majority to put up with this sort of behavior anymore. Linked to this, of course, is the whole issue of trade, which was a massive issue at BRICS, because we soon after the summit ended, we had Donald Trump say that anybody who has anything to do with BRICS, we're going to put tariffs up by 10%. Now, of course, that's down from what he said before. I think he said something like 100% before. And anybody who has anything to do with BRICS, we're going to 100% tariff you. But it's down to about 10% now. But, the only deal that he's managed to do really has involved one BRICS partner, Vietnam, and where I am, Britain. So, I think people are starting to see through this, and I think the sort of faith that nations are putting into BRICS is really quite important. They're seeing this as a vehicle to move forward. So what we saw in Rio this week was a real consolidation of BRICS. Now, of course, one of the big issues around about BRICS has been this whole question of, should we have a new currency to rival the dollar? What has been happening over some years now is that more and more BRICS nations, BRICS partners are moving more and more towards conducting trade in their own currencies. And I think we're going to continue to see that for at least the foreseeable future. But what we saw at BRICS in Rio this week was a real commitment, I think, towards breaking down these financial institutions that have governed the planet since World War II. So there's really clear signals sent out that the predominance of the IMF and the World Bank, I think, is coming to an end, and that can only be good news for those nations that have been on the receiving end of the structured adjustment programs that have been put in place by those organizations. So what's been said here, I think, is really, really important, that we want to have financial institutions that more relate to what we need for the global majority. And that, of course, includes this SWIFT system, which is essentially about how banks talk to each other. It's essentially an old-fashioned email system in reality. But what that is saying is that we want to move away from that, because even the United States has been really clear that moves away from the SWIFT system harms their ability to be able to sanction nations from the global majority. So anything that moves away from that must be good. So a lot of work has been signaled about how they can about bringing in new mechanisms for the within the BRICS Bank to allow a proper communication, to support the trade between nations, and to support the trade in each other's currencies. Will we go on and see a new currency? Well, Lula, president of Brazil, certainly signaled that before this summit started. He was really, really clear that unless we have a new currency for the global south, a new reserve currency, then we're just going to be in this same boat that we've been in for the last century, essentially, and still have the dominance of the United States. So I think, Prasanth, there's been some real progress. I think it was far more than I think many analysts thought might happen, given that it was so close to the last summit in Kazan in Russia. We, I think, are seeing real progress from the BRICS Bank and the BRICS as a bloc of nations that are intent on breaking away from the US domination.
Right, Roger, absolutely. And I think it's important also to compare the BRICS to what happened with the G7 very recently, where they couldn't really agree on a statement. And the G7 comprises technically countries, all of whom share pretty much the same, global north-centric ideology, most of them vassals of the United States. And yet the chaos right now within the global north, within that camp is so intense that they're not even able to come out with a statement. Whereas BRICS, as many observers have pointed out, comprises so many countries, so many different political systems, so many different perspectives. And yet they've actually, I think, been able to come up with a model whereby, we can always want more, we can always demand more. But the fact is, we have to accept the fact that they have come up with a model where they're able to work together, where they're able to issue a very comprehensive joint declaration together, where they're able to take steps on the ground concretely towards building those institutions, like you said. I think also another very important point is the fact that this time, I think for the first time, the BRICS People's Council, which is the voice of people's organizations, movements, civil society institutions, actually got a say at the main table, so to speak. Usually, these groups are kept in a corner. But this time we had João Pedro Stedile of the Landless Rural Workers Movement addressing the heads of state summit. There was an entire process where people's organizations from these countries combined together to present a set of demands to the BRICS leaders. And like I said, one of them was strengthening the New Development Bank. There was a question, for instance, of how do you use the NDB's funds to help grassroots movements? There was a question of how do you deal with the problems such as tax havens, and really pushing BRICS into an even more progressive part. So it's actually very welcome to see that there was this kind of an initiative that was given space, and it was given serious space, and there was this entire process of discussions that took place. On People's Dispatch, you will find a number of articles which reflect that process, including a document regarding the final conclusions. I urge all of you to take a look at that. But like you said, very important summit also. You mentioned Iran. They also took a stand on Palestine. Again, significant. Indonesia joined, another significant moment. So I think what we're seeing is the building of the very slow process of building of these structures and institutions, which people look at the currency as the most important aspect, and in a way it is, like you said, that could mean a sea change to everything. But I also think there's a lot of background work that is going on in building and strengthening, adding muscle to some of those institutions, which will take some time. The impact will take some time to show. And I guess it's a good thing that's happening, because as the next couple of segments really are going to show you, there's no time like now when we need it even more, considering what the United States and its allies, the chaos they have been wreaking. We'll first go to Yemen, where there has been one of the countries which has been resisting that chaos, resisting that onslaught. Roger, take us to what's been happening there.
Yeah, in fact, probably the only country that's been resisting. And I think so. What we saw this week was the resumption of the Houthi-led Yemeni government. Troops from that nation confronting shipping again in the Red Sea. So we had two attacks this week, including just yesterday the sinking of one vessel. Now, when this has happened before, what we've seen is almost an immediate retaliation by the Israelis. Of course, these ships are often given all sorts of labels, that they're Liberian kind of flagged and Greek owned and all this sort of stuff, and often that's a front. And these ships, these vessels, are trading with Israel. And that's why the Yemenis are attacking them, because they are really, really clear that as far as they're concerned, they are standing up for the Palestinians who are facing attacks in Gaza. And it's really important, because they have been unflinching in standing up and saying that we are going to stand up for the Palestinians, even if nobody else is going to do that. And all these fine words that we often see from other nations in the Middle East, most of them have still got trading arrangements with Israel, and many of those, of course, are coming through the Red Sea as well. So the Yemenis have been taking this action. They have been having success. They sunk the ship yesterday. They boarded it and sunk the ship. Unfortunately, 3 people, as I understand it, were killed during the raid. But what is happening here is that the Yemenis are taking a stand, and are clear that they will be, no doubt, facing retaliation from the Israelis. I suppose one question, Prasanth, is whether this will also bring the US back into attacking Yemen again. The US, of course, were forced to abandon their attacks on Yemen when they last did it, because it was having no effect whatsoever. And the Yemenis were standing up. So despite all the kind of usual bravado that we hear from Trump about, we're going to bomb them off the face of the world and all this sort of stuff, actually, the Yemenis are still there, and they're still able to launch missile attacks into Israel as well. Significant attacks that are getting through this famed Iron Dome, which is clearly not working. So I suspect that what we'll see over the coming days and weeks, Prasanth, is that we'll see the Yemenis continuing to have their blockade, if you like, of the Red Sea. But I suspect as well we'll see the Israelis do what they always do, which is to hit back Yemen, at the same time as the US is continuing to give them the military hardware to be able to not just hit Yemen, but also to continue to attack Lebanon and to continue its attacks on Syria as well. So this is to be continued, and it's something that I think is, you know, I think that the Yemenis will continue to stand up for the Palestinians, and somebody has to.
Right, Roger. Actually, speaking of Israel and the United States, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was in Washington, met Donald Trump a couple of times. And the recent news in, what do you call it, from the region, from Palestine especially, has been the question or the discussions on a truce. And now we've been hearing talks of a truce, or talks about a truce for quite some time now. And I think it's very instructive to see how the Israelis have been, for lack of a better word, shifting the goalposts so blatantly with the assistance, with the connivance of the United States. And the latest round of discussions are actually were basically stuck on three main questions. One was really the question of what the idea was, to have a 60-day truce, and the question was what would happen during those 60 days. Would there be discussions for the next round of ceasefire? Now, it's very important to note that in January, when a ceasefire agreement was signed, it was decided that during the ceasefire, there would be discussions to extend the ceasefire and to maybe even look at the war concluding in some way or the other. But Israel obviously violated that, right? So that is something Hamas was very, very clear that they wanted. As of now, I think all the parties have kind of agreed on the fact that there would be guarantees of some kind. Not very clear what those guarantees are, but there would be guarantees of some kind. The other second question was really about the aid, which is a very, very important question, because we've seen what Israel has been doing over the past couple of months, which is that first they imposed this 2-month long blockade, a complete blockade of humanitarian goods, thousands of trucks stuck at the border crossings, and then they started allowing relief to be distributed to the Palestinians under the auspices of what is called the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which is a complete charade. I think about 600 people have been killed in these what are known as now aid massacres. That's an official term, because time and again what has happened is that people have been gathering in large numbers to get access to these aid. Israeli soldiers have been continuously firing at them. Private contractors have apparently fired at them. And the whole thing is clearly just a trap to kill more people, or to make people, or to push the Palestinians to leave the territory, because food has become such a deadly commodity at this point of time. And the third issue, as far as the ceasefire was concerned, was really regarding what would happen to the Israeli troops when the ceasefire started, whether they would withdraw to positions where they were at before the previous ceasefire was violated or not. And that is really where apparently the discussions are stuck. It would seem commonsensical that one of the conditions for a ceasefire be that Israel withdraw, but apparently that is too much for the Israelis. And really, this really shows the extent to which I think Israel is really bearing down on the people of Gaza right now. We've seen multiple reports of some of the wild, bizarre, outrageous plans that are kind of circulating. The idea that the people of Gaza be basically restricted to very small, so-called. I mean, there's never been a moment where the word humanitarian has been so horribly misused. There would be these humanitarian corridors where people would get access to food, very small corridors. And then clearly the idea is, and these documents explicitly say so, clearly the idea is that people, after they come to these corridors, will be basically encouraged to leave Gaza and go to neighboring countries. Similarly, we have seen documents supposedly from the Boston Consulting Group. They're in complete denial, huge multinational consulting firm, which again indicate that they're planning to pay people. There was a proposal that people be paid to leave Gaza. So this is essentially full-fledged ethnic cleansing, which was always the aim of the Israelis, which Donald Trump explicitly meant and clearly said when he said that he wanted this Rivera and the Gaza or whatever. And we see these moves very clearly being undertaken in that direction. Benjamin Netanyahu, I believe, recently said yesterday or the day before that, he doesn't see a Palestinian state, which all of us knew, of course, but really, once again makes it, although there are UN resolutions which clearly indicate or mandate that, so that clearly goes to show how much he values the United Nations as an institution. So I think all of this are very dangerous signs ahead in the coming weeks and months. The humanitarian crisis has reached extreme proportions. People being killed when they're going for food. Doctors, doctors, health professionals being killed. Media professionals being killed. People from all walks of life being brutalized in every possible way. And clearly, the aim is ethnic cleansing. Clearly, a genocidal war taking place, and of course, completely supported by the United States, European countries who are pretending that all of this is not happening at all, or all of this is just Israel defending itself. So we need to see what happens. And talking about that, Roger, I believe that some of these tentacles already extending further in countries across the West, especially the UK right now, where it seems protesting about this is becoming more and more criminal as we speak. Even you could be in danger, I suppose, for talking in this segment about what you're going to talk about.
Yeah, it's it seems that you can have a genocide take place in front of your very eyes, but having non-violent protest against that genocide is being criminalized. Not just in Britain, I should say as well, but certainly all other parts of Europe, and certainly seems that it's certainly the case in North America as well. But in here, it's been there's been an escalation of the clampdown by the British authorities on protest. So we've had. In recent days, we've had an organisation called Palestine Action, which is a non-violent body that has led non-violent protests, who recently entered into a Royal Air Force base and painted an aircraft red. Signified blood and so on. I should say as well that some great investigative reporting by Craig Murray showed that these aircraft weren't even owned by the British state. They were owned by private companies. So actually what we have is the British state prosecuting on behalf of companies that are way down the line. There's about 2 or 3 sets of companies who are involved in the ownership of these airplanes. But Palestine Action were put on a terrorist list, designated as a terrorist organization. And what that effectively means that anybody who professes support for Palestine Action or support for any of their actions is liable to be charged and liable to be prosecuted for that support or alleged support. Now, of course, that could easily spread to the media in the way that we report what happens and protests generally. And I want to just kind of extend this a little bit, because we've also had a case this week where 2 of the leaders of the peace movement in Britain, so Ben Jamal, who is the director of Palestine Solidarity Campaign, Chris Nynham, who is one of the leaders of the Stop the War Coalition, they had a court case this week where they were told that actions that they allegedly took at a protest, about 400,000, 500,000 people in January earlier on this year, that the actions they took were against the law, and despite the fact that all of the actions that they took were negotiated in advance with the police, and that they were arrested on the day, and they were told at court this week that they would have to come back and face a court hearing in February of next year. So they're going to have to wait for more than a year to have their day in court, to find out whether or not they're going to be, guilty or not guilty of this alleged breaking of the law. What we also found out this week was two other leaders of the peace movement. So Sophie Bolt, who's the General Secretary of the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament, oldest and the biggest peace movement in Britain. Alex Kenny, who's the chair of Stop the War campaign. They have heard this week that they're also going to be prosecuted and also going to be charged for the same event in January that took place in January. Now, we're confident that the peace movement will stand up and support these people. But what's also happened as well is that during this week, where there was protests against the prescription of Palestine Action as a terrorist organization, there was an 83-year-old clergywoman called Sue Parfitt, the Reverend Sue Parfitt, retired clergywoman, who was arrested for having a homemade poster that basically supported Palestine, but also claimed on the poster that she was in favor of Palestine Action. This is where we've got to in Britain at the moment, where there's a massive clampdown taking place against protests in favour of the Palestinians, and where there's a real mood where people are being told really that you must be really careful about everything that you do and everything that you say, or you run the risk of being arrested. I think campaigners in this country are really, really clear that we must continue to stand up for the Palestinians, and we will continue to do that. We will continue with the same non-violent protests that we have adopted since we started our campaign to show up the genocide that's taking place, and also to expose the role of Britain in continuing to arm the Israelis and continuing to provide intelligence so that the Israelis can carry out their genocide. So this is an important escalation by the British state in the way that they're clamping down on protests, and one that we refuse to be we refuse to kowtow to, that we will continue to campaign against in Britain.
Right, Roger. I think one of the amazing things in this very bleak time is the fact that despite this kind of repression, you're right in the sense it's not just the United Kingdom, it's Germany, it's France, it's the United States, so many countries, especially in the global north, that have cracked down on protests. The protests continue nonetheless, massive rallies across the world. It's always very inspiring seeing them. And that brings us to our final story, which we try to often end these shows on a slightly more positive note than some of the other stories in this episode. And today we're going to be talking about the great national strike in India that took place today. That is the 9th of July. We talked about it a couple of weeks ago. It was supposed to happen in June, actually, but because of the India-Pakistan conflict, it was postponed. And this strike is actually the culmination of weeks and weeks, in fact, months of mobilizing by all the major trade unions, except the National Trade Union affiliated to the, which shares the same ideology as the ruling Bharatiya Janata Party. And, these trade unions, again, coming from a variety of ideologies, a variety of sectors, a lot of smaller trade unions as well, a lot of sectoral trade unions, a lot of regional trade unions, but coming together on this huge charter of demands and conducting this national strike, which is really a wondrous thing, that a strike that takes place across the country. The numbers say around 25 million workers taking part in this strike. Definitely makes it probably the biggest strike in the world. And I think the questions these people, these workers on strike, also supported, by the way, by farmers' organizations, by agricultural workers' organizations, students, youth, women's organizations, all of them are posing very structural questions to the Indian government, especially regarding the question of work itself, which all of us are involved in because of what the Indian government has brought, what are called the labor codes. Basically, they've codified all existing labor laws into 4 labor codes, some of which have not been fully rolled out yet, but all of them together are a huge blow to workers. They prevent They place significant barriers before organizing at the workplace. They loosen the kind of rules on employers, which means the possibility of exploitation is much more. They loosen regulation on employers. The question of minimum wage, for instance, is not addressed. Contractualization increases. The possibility of permanent jobs decreases. And variety of problems that these labor codes are bringing to the system. The workers are asking for a minimum wage of 26,000 rupees. They are demanding that the right to organize really be enshrined, because there's been a consistent attack on the right to organize in India. They're asking for the rollback of privatization of key government enterprises. They're asking, for instance, that a lot of these very punitive laws, which are increasingly being used against trade unionists, against critics, against those who protest the government's ways. We just talked about it in the UK. In India, that's happening a lot too. A lot of these extremely powerful punitive laws are being used against those organizing for workers. They're demanding that those be withdrawn. They're also saying, on the other hand, we see, on the one hand, we see workers, organizers being targeted this way. On the other hand, we see rules being relaxed for corporates, which means that they don't have to pay fines. They get way more write-offs, so to speak. So there's this entire structure which enables the welfare of corporates and is affecting the people. And there's this huge chart. I urge you to go to People's Dispatch. They'll have a complete, comprehensive report of that, describing the reasons for the strike as well and what the response has been. But a stupendous turnout today across the country. It's beautiful visuals, massive marches, taking place across, and gives us a lot of hope in terms of the fact that people don't talk so much about trade unions. People don't talk so much about workers organizing these days. So it's always very heartening, very inspiring, and very powerful to see these millions of people from so many different backgrounds coming together on common demands, calling for their rights, calling for telling the government that it is the government's duty to protect these hard-won rights. The government cannot be the government of the corporates, of the big business interests. It has to be the government of the people. And that is one of the oldest struggles in human history, and it continues to this day, and we're sure it will continue in the coming years and decades as well. So on that note, we'll end this episode. Thank you for watching. Give the people what they want. Do read People's Dispatch. Do read Morning Star. And we'll be back next week with Zoe, who's been traveling this week. She'll be back too next week as well. And we'll bring you a wide variety of stories, geopolitics, people's struggles, you name it, we'll have it on the show.